Okay, so Royston, I'm glad you're here. You're gonna probably enjoy this a lot. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about creating a sustainable ecosystem and learning from birds, bats, and bees, and many other sort of critters that live in urban areas, and why it's important to protect them and nurture their well-being and the benefits from that. So, as Tobias said, I'm Jonce Walker. I'm the Global Director of Sustainability and Wellness at HLW. HLW is a global design firm and architecture and design. So this is going to be sort of in the context of the urban environment, the built environment, and how we can learn from these amazing creatures and integrate them into our buildings and where we live and work. So quick description. I just want to read this. I know it's sort of not a good idea to read a slide, but I wanted to just get this read. So a little bit about this conversation. Over generations, ecosystems have been optimized out of the built environment. They have become ornaments. Flora and fauna have been regulated to the boundaries of the city park and designed into sterility. However, recent initiatives to regreen cities and landscape buildings offer new opportunities for a biophilic future. So we're going to talk about implementation of green roofs, green spaces, and learning from birds, bats, and bees, and other insects to form our urban ecosystems. So hopefully I will convey the importance around pollinators and biodiversity and native ecosystems in cities. We'll talk about our thriving ecosystems and how it benefits our own personal well-being. And then I'm going to talk about this idea, which I've been talking about for a few years now, which is biophilic urban acupuncture. So bear with me. That's kind of an exciting bookend to this talk. So first, bees. Royston, this is for you. This is a terrace in Manhattan. This is on top of a building. This is an architecture firm that my wife previously worked at, and they grow food up here, and they grow plants for pollinators, but they also have an active apiary and on this roof. And what this does is it connects people to nature and natural systems, but it also provides critical habitat to bees and other pollinators, which are in decline. And this is a picture of my friend Spencer, who's also a beekeeper. He's also an architect, but he's the beekeeper for this space. And he's checking one of the modules that's in the apiary and checking the health of the bees. They import Italian bees every so often to this apiary. And the fascinating thing is that the honey actually changes color depending on the season. This actually is near Central Park, so most of the bees go to Central Park as the biggest green space to pollinate, and then the color of the honey differs depending on the season. So in the fall, it's a little bit darker, and in the spring, it's a little bit lighter. And this is the office actually sort of harvesting the honey. And it becomes a brilliant marketing tool because when they have clients come through, they actually give them a Cook Fox branded jar of honey that they can take home with them. So not only is it good for ecology, but it's also a little bit of some clever marketing. So we have an amazing variety of bees in the US. There's about 4,000 species of them, and each of them are unique. Each of them have evolved to pollinate plants and differently, and have been able to evolve and thrive in specific climates. So we know a little bit about leafcutter and mason bees. They don't sting, but they do not produce honey, but they're still critical to pollination of some of our fruits and vegetables that we enjoy. The one we're probably most common with is bumblebees. They love to roll around in flowers and they gather pollen that no other insect can actually get to. So messy bees make for great pollinators. They live in small colonies, usually between 50 to 400 of them together at a time. So There are also other important pollinators. Of course, we've been hearing about the monarch butterfly. We are in a monarch butterfly pathway, so it's important to plant species that support butterflies, especially monarchs. But also flies can be pollinators. And some interesting little fact is there's a fly called the chocolate midge. It is the only pollinator for the cacao. So if you like chocolate, you want to make sure the chocolate midge survives because they are the only thing pollinating our chocolate at the moment. So a little bit about how to help advance habitat for bees and other pollinators. Super important to plant native, diverse landscapes. What I mean by that is, if you're thinking about a green roof or even a yard, the problem with monocultured lawns or grass is that it is not a habitat for anything. It might be fun to use to play catch on, but it's not going to help support habitat. So if you can, it's important to plant native, diverse landscapes that support local pollinators, including bees, butterflies, dragonflies, etc. The other thing we've been doing a lot of in the US is we've been spraying everything with pesticides and other harmful chemicals that are used to kill other things we don't like. But the problem is that kills all of these other really important species in the process. So there's a movement to sort of restrict use of pesticides, but also try to eliminate or plan for or design for local species and not invasive species, because the invasive species will overcrowd that habitat and push out all the helpful things that we want to keep alive. So moving to birds, this is just a little, these are all the birds that were spotted on that little terrace. So birds can actually fly up quite high and roost and eat insects and worms and all sorts of other things on top of roof terraces that are 15, 20 stories up. So this is just some of the birds they've actually spotted at this roof terrace that has the apiary. It's quite a lovely sort of assortment of birds. However, the bummer news is that bird population has been declining in the US and Canada since the 1970s. And this is just a sort of a graph showing from the Audubon Society the impact of bird decline. There's been about a 30% decline since 1970. So we are moving in the wrong direction. And part of that is some of our buildings. So bird collision, I'm sure you've probably heard of this or even maybe been in a building when this has happened. It's terrifying. But we kill between 600 and 1 billion birds in the United States because they fly into our buildings. This can be solved. It doesn't have to be this way. Just a quick sort of interesting difference between all glass buildings. The developers love building all glass buildings, but they kill around 1,000 birds annually with all glass buildings versus 1 to 10 birds annually with a building that has what's called a different window to wall ratio, meaning there's more masonry, there's more brick, there's more limestone or brownstone or something else that is an opaque facade versus these glass shard towers that developers like to build. So I don't have a map of Jersey, but you can translate this right across the river. There are stopovers in our area. Birds love to fly into this region, and they usually arrive early morning. So they've been flying all night. They're super tired. They're trying to look for a place to rest. And these are some of the popular stopover areas. Obviously Central Park. And then the first one they see is Battery Park. They probably see Liberty State Park, on the other side of the river. These are places they want to try to land. The problem is we have a lot of glassy towers in these areas as well. So they get a little bit confused and they end up running into a lot of these buildings. So we want to think a little differently on how to mitigate some of these strategies. So there's 4 major reasons why they run into buildings. Transparency, right? They see through the building. Reflection, they see themselves. They're trying to fly through something. They're seeing something else in the building, or they're seeing something on the other side of the building, so they're trying to fly through it. Or this thing called the beacon effect, which is a light, and they're drawn to that light within the building. So there's lots of strategies we can do to mitigate that. Some of that is scrim or fritting on the building, so like a film or something on the glazing, but actually they can see. Vegetation near the building, so they land at the vegetation before they run into the building. Operable windows, and hopefully you can tilt glass a different way. And then of course, just things like turning the lights out when you don't need them. So birds like to fly through kind of this idea of a 2-inch by 4-inch space. So it's not very big, and they can fit through that. So we want to try to design mitigation strategies that fit this like 2 by 4 space. Ways to do that: architectural expression, more glass equals more collisions. So if we can do things like louvers or thermal strategies for like external louvers to do several things at once, shade the building, but also prevent bird strikes, glass treatment like frits, irregular shapes or spacing, and you can even do retrofits. There's things on the market right now that are very effective at just putting decals. You've probably been in buildings that have decals on the windows. Those work really great as well. Another thing that's interesting is there's actually glazing companies now that are making patterns in the glass that we can't see, but the birds can see, and they mimic spider webs. There's a company called Ornilux that does this, and there's some other companies now on the market that make this. So birds don't like flying through spider webs. So if it looks like a spider web, they're not going to fly through it. There's also this sort of test that the American Bird Conservancy has done around these different bands of least threat potential to greatest threat potential. So there's different products on the market that fit within that range. And then just this idea that buildings shouldn't kill birds. And there's things within certain criteria. There's now actually a bill in New York City that they worked really hard to pass that actually requires bird-friendly glass at a certain height above buildings. So now in New York City, if you're going to build a new building, you actually do have to do this by law. This is not a law in New Jersey yet, but it's something that I think the Audubon Society and other concerned environmental and sustainability folks are pushing for, but New York is the first to do it. So other things, bird-friendly windows we talked about, avoid pesticide use, super deadly to birds as well as the pollinators that I talked about. Diversity of plantings will really help sort of bolster up habitat for birds. Another interesting one is cats should be indoors. Cats kill a ton of birds. Almost 2.5 billion birds a year become cat snacks. So try to keep birds inside. Then obviously just talk about it and be aware about it. So the last critter I want to mention is bats. They are fascinating animals. We don't know a lot about them. We've been taught and trained to be scared of them, but they're actually pretty incredible. There's about 1,000 species. Out of the 4,000 mammals, 1,000 of them are bats. They are loyal, they are social. They actually can hibernate through the winter, and then others will migrate. So, and there's been some cities that have really celebrated bats. Austin's one of them. They have this big thing every evening in the summer where all the bats fly under the bridge. So it can be sort of an interesting economic boost to cities who want to celebrate that. And then don't be scared. Don't pick them up, but they typically don't carry diseases. That's a thing we've been told many, many times, but it's not actually true. So there's other little things you can do to buildings. You can build bat houses. This is actually on that same project. You can build bat houses on the side of your building or in your community garden, which I'm hoping we'll hear about, or spaces like that. It's very simple to build. There are plans online. And this is just some guidance. If you wanted to build a bat house, this is how you could do it. So some tips on how to help. More habitat for these guys. Bat houses, solitary bats, keep it natural. If you're wanting to try to do one maybe in the corner of a community garden, you don't have to be fancy, just keep it simple. Pesticides, again, the reoccurring theme here. water, typically fresh or clean water, and you can replace that water if you do that. It's also good for butterflies, so it's a great strategy for many pollinators. And then just educate, support bats, and talk about their importance. So I have just a few slides left, and I hope I'm doing okay on time. I'd love to get to other conversations, but a little bit about this idea of biophilic urban acupuncture. And I sort of came up with this term a few years ago. It's not acupuncture. It's not going to an acupuncturist. It's just this idea that nodes, specific and strategic nature nodes in urban places can have a profound effect across a web of a city. That's the idea. So being really smart about where we do our community gardens, being really smart about where we do our pocket parks, and where we do our bioswales, and where we do all of these really wonderful green infrastructure things, and trying to weave together a web around an urban place. And what does that mean to the people that live there, and how they move about that place in that city? So think about your daily commute. Do you walk past a green space? Do you interact with an urban garden? Do you interact with even a micro green space? What does that mean to you? What would it mean if you had a bigger place to walk through, a bigger park to walk through? The point is, this is not about a destination park. This is not about Central Park. Central Park's amazing. It's beautiful, but it's a destination. Most people don't walk from the west side of Manhattan to the east side of Manhattan through Central Park. You could, but that's typically not a normal commute, right? So what I'm talking about are micro places, places in parks like Madison Square Park. This is an amazing park. It's my favorite park in New York City. And the reason why it's incredible is because it has all these different biophilic features built in. You have the fountain. You have this olfaction experience of fragrant plants. You have these sort of critter hotels where, bees and other critters can build a habitat. And then you also have things like the osprey and the falcon. And I can tell you, I was walking through this park one day, and there was a falcon on a limb. This is a picture I took of it. And there was, it was enjoying a snack. Let's just put it that way. And there was literally a dead animal, parts of a dead animal falling onto the sidewalk while New Yorkers were busy walking to their office. And while people might think that's disgusting, I thought it was quite incredible. So there is robust nature in even small parks like Madison Square Park that we should celebrate. The other thing we should embrace is our tidal wetlands and our rivers. We have kind of out-designed the river, and we don't even understand when the tide comes in and when the tide goes out anymore. And we need to think about that differently and think about integrating in those natural rhythms into our spaces, our projects, our communities. This is a project in Brooklyn. This is 1 John Street, where it has a tidal marsh that floods during the high tide and it drains out during the low tide, and it creates this wonderful micro biophilic urban acupuncture within the city. And then even shrinking down scales, a little bit about bioswales. So bioswales are essentially rain gardens, right? They slow down the water before it gets into the Hudson River or any other really important tributaries. And they also create habitat. They mitigate urban heat island. There's all these co-benefits that nature provides that we're not even cracking the code yet to figure out. And then just getting fun. This is a flower flash. This is a guy named Lewis Miller. He's a florist, but he also does these pop-up flower flashes around the city. And I'm talking about a scale that's beautiful and small, but also temporary, but an important piece of nature in an urban landscape, even if it's only for a moment. There's a couple other pictures like that. So looking at the clock, I just want to end, I like to end with a little bit of music. One of my favorite bands talks about this idea of moving your feet from the hot pavement and into the grass, and how does that feel for you? So thank you so much for listening. I'm happy to now put myself on mute per Tobias's request, and love to hear you all chat about what I just shared. Thank you guys so much.